It was October 20th in the year 1774 that the First Continental Congress creates the Continental Association, which calls for a complete ban on all trade between America and Great Britain of all goods, wares, or merchandise. The creation of the association was in response to the coercive acts, or intolerable acts, as they were known to the colonists, which were established by the British government to restore order in Massachusetts following the Boston Tea Party. The intolerable acts were a set of 4 acts. The first was the Boston Port Act, which closed the port of Boston to all colonists until damages from the Boston Tea Party were paid. The second, the Massachusetts Government Act, gave the British government total control of town meetings, taking all decisions out of the hands of the colonists. The third, the Administration of Justice Act, made British officials immune to criminal prosecution in America. And the fourth, the Quartering Act, required colonists to house and quarter British troops on demand, including in private homes as a last resort. Outraged by the new laws mandated by the British Parliament, the Continental Association hoped that cutting off all trade with Great Britain would cause enough economic hardship there that the intolerable acts would be repealed. It was one of the first acts of Congress behind which every colony firmly stood. It was October 20th in the year 1803 that the U.S. Senate approved a treaty with France providing for the purchase of the territory of Louisiana, which would double the size of our awesome nation. At the end of the 18th century, the Spanish technically owned Louisiana, the huge region west of the Mississippi that had once been claimed by France and named for its monarch, King Louis XIV. Despite Spanish ownership, American settlers in search of new land were already threatening to overrun the territory by the early 19th century. Recognizing it could not effectively maintain control of the region, Spain ceded Louisiana back to France in 1801, sparking intense anxieties in Washington, D.C. Under the leadership of Napoleon Bonaparte, France had become the most powerful nation in Europe, and unlike Spain, it had the military power and the ambition to establish a strong colony in Louisiana and keep out the Americans. Realizing that it was essential that the U.S. at least maintain control of the mouth of the all-important Mississippi River. Early in 1803, President Thomas Jefferson, our nation's third president, of course, and James Monroe, our nation's fifth president, to join the French foreign minister, Robert Livingston, in France to see if Napoleon might be persuaded to sell New Orleans and West Florida to the U.S. By that spring, the European situation had changed radically. Napoleon, who had previously envisioned creating a mighty new French empire in America, was now facing war with Great Britain. Rather than risk the strong possibility that Great Britain would quickly capture Louisiana and leave France with nothing, Napoleon decided to raise money for his war and simultaneously deny his enemy Plum territory by offering to sell the entire territory to the great US of A for a mere $15 million. Flabbergasted, Monroe and Livingston decided that they couldn't pass up such a golden opportunity, and they wisely overstepped the powers delegated to them and accepted Napoleon's offer. Awesome decision. Now, the Constitution made no provision for the addition of territory by treaty. And despite his misgivings about the constitutionality of the purchase, Thomas Jefferson finally agreed to send the treaty to the U.S. Senate for ratification, noting privately, quote, "The less we say about constitutional difficulties, the better," unquote. Despite his concerns, the treaty was ratified, and the Louisiana Purchase now ranks as the greatest achievement of Jefferson's presidency. It was October 20th in 1977, during the summertime, that members of the rock band Aerosmith inspected an airplane they were considering chartering for their upcoming tour. A Convair 240 operated out of Addison, Texas. Concerns over the flight crew led Aerosmith to look elsewhere, a decision that saved one band but doomed another. The aircraft in question was instead chartered by the band Skynrd, who was just setting out that autumn on a national tour that promised to be their biggest to date. On October 20th in 1977, during a flight from Greenville, South Carolina to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Lynrd Skynyrd's tour plane crashed in a heavily wooded area of southeastern Mississippi during a failed emergency landing attempt. Band members Ronnie Van Zant, Steve Gaines, and Cassie Gaines, as well as the band's assistant road manager and the plane's pilot and co-pilot, all continued their eternity. 20 others survived the crash. The original core of Lynrd Skynrd, Ronnie Van Zant, Bob Burns, Gary Rossington, Alan Collins, and Larry Junstrom first came together under the name My Backyard back in 1964 as Jacksonville, Florida teenagers. Under that name and several others, the group developed its chops playing local and regional gigs throughout the 1960s and early 1970s. They broke out nationally in 1973 following the adoption of the name Lynrd Skynrd in honor of a high school gym teacher nemesis named Lynrd Skynrd. The newly renamed band scored a major hit with their hard-driving debut album pronounced Lynrd Skynrd in 1973, which featured one of the most familiar and joked-about rock anthems of all time, Free Bird. Their follow-up album, Second Helping in 1974, included the even bigger hit Sweet Home Alabama, and it secured the band's status as giants of the southern rock subgenre. On October 17th in the year 1977, Lynrd Skynrd released their fifth studio album, Street Survivors, which would eventually be certified double platinum. 3 days later, however, tragedy struck the group when their chartered Convair 240 began to run out of fuel at 6,000 feet en route to Baton Rouge. The plane's crew, whom the National Transportation Safety Board would hold responsible for the mishap in the accident, report issued 8 months later radioed Houston Air Traffic Control as the plane lost altitude, asking for directions to the nearest airfield. Quote, "We're low on fuel and we're just about out of it," unquote, the pilot told Houston Center at approximately 6:42 p.m. Quote, "We want vectors to Macomb Airfield. Post haste. Please, sir," unquote. Approximately 13 minutes later, however, the plane crashed just outside of Galesburg, Mississippi. The historic information divulged and documented on this audio file can be verified on history.com.